what happened there. But welcome, Stunt Hanger How-Tos. Tonight we're going to plumb a Clunk tank. I get requests from time to time on how to do things, and I figured we'd do that. Now, most of the time, I use a metal tank like this, but if anybody's ever built and flown a Nobler, they know that the nose is very thin. Now, a green box Nobler comes with a tank pattern, how to make your own tank. And I've made them in the past. But it's just as easy to get a Clunk tank, a flex tank like this, and put it in the nose. And they work just as well. Of course, when you do that, you do have to allow for the engine bearers, you have to grind them out so that this tank can sit up in the nose a little farther, or when it's upside down into the cavity. But we're going to plumb that Clunk tank tonight. And if you have any questions, you can ask me on the forum. You can ask me here. But I think it'll be pretty clear when we're done. So let's get to it. Gather up all your parts. In this bag there'll be a stopper, a screw, 2 pieces of brass tubing, and some wire. I normally just throw the wire out. For this job you're going to need an X-Acto knife. We're going to cut the tubing in half. Here I'm using a scalpel to skive the tubing in half. The unfortunate thing is a scalpel just doesn't have enough strength, so later on in the video I used I think it's a number 22, the large carving X-Acto blade to cut down through it. Much better. You're going to have to take the tubing and force it through the holes in the stopper. There's normally only 2 holes that are open, so you're going to have to open the third one with a drill or by forcing the tube down through it. I normally only put the 2 tubes in and not the overflow, but you can put the third tube, the overflow, in and do it all at once. I leave them at this length because you can adjust the length of the tubing so that the Clunk goes all the way to the back. Measure a piece of the surgical tubing so that the Clunk touches the back wall of the tank. This is the pickup tube that the Clunk goes on. Make sure the Clunk goes all the way to the corner, yet is free. You want it to move freely inside there. You don't want it hung up, so don't make it too long. We're going to take a second piece of tubing and we're going to solder an X-shaped apparatus onto the Clunk for the uniflow tube. Normally you have to solder an extension piece onto the Clunk, so that you have enough to wrap a piece of copper wire and attach the two tubes together, as I will show here later in this series. Here I'm cutting off about a 1-inch piece of brass tubing from an annealed 1/8-inch tube. You want to use annealed tubing. If you don't have annealed tubing, you can take that brass tubing and heat it up on the stove till it's red hot and then quench it. And that way it'll become malleable. You notice there the blade broke. You can't push much on a scalpel. So the big gun comes out. Deburr the end of the tubing and put it inside the clunk. That way you have a little bit of room to solder your X piece to. It's been a while since I've done a clunk tank, so had to re-engineer it as I went. Here the parts are being ready for solder. You're going to need some copper wire. This is just fine copper wire I use to do lead outs and flying lines with. And of course a good soldering gun. The soldering gun I'm using is a Weller 100-140 watt. One thing about a soldering gun, if you're like me and you're using extension cord, it won't get as hot as if you plug it right into the outlet. Wrap about 5 or 6 turns around the two pieces and then twist the wire together. This is what the apparatus should look like at this stage. When you're soldering, don't try to heat the solder up on the object. Get the part hot first. Add your flux. This is Stay Bright solder. Add the flux, get the piece hot, and feed the solder onto the piece. That way you'll get a good hot joint, not a cold joint that's going to come apart at a later time. As far as soldering onto the clunk, use the clunk to sweat the solder into it. Once you've done that, grab a pair of pliers and pull the uniflow tube down onto the clunk. That way it won't get hung up in the tank. It should look like this. The uniflow tube is not quite as long as the clunk. Then add your tubes back and you're going to attach the uniflow to the tubing you just soldered. Stick it in the tank, make sure it works. Adjust it so that it doesn't rub on the back. And it moves freely inside. Tighten up the screw. I usually try to keep the two uniflow and the pickup tube level across the front. Give it a few shakes. Make sure it's in the corner. Make sure that your overflow tube is at the top. And that's it. Nothing to it. Well, I hope you enjoyed that tutorial on how to make a Clunk tank work. I've done them this way for years. I'm sure there's other ways to do them. I've seen the guys put the tube straight back or whatever. The reason I like doing this is that you can unloosen this screw and rotate the cap, and that will change the uniflow height, thus thinking that the tank height is changing. So this is really a good way to do things, I think. So, you know, if you have a better way, send it to me. Maybe I'll look at it and give it a try. I've done it this way for, well, ever since I've ever used Clunk tanks, 25, 30 years. Just make sure that the Clunk is free in there and it runs all the way back to the corner, and your overflow tube is all the way to the top. And don't worry that it's not up in this little bump, because the bump is on the side now. It doesn't matter. So, till I see you again, fair winds, tight lines. Oh, by the way, make sure to like, subscribe, and share the video. Till next time, see ya!